It was a Wednesday night in mid-October, 2022. The kind of evening in Oklahoma where the sky turns soft with burnt orange, and the air smells like the earth is finally breathing after a long, dry day. The house was quiet, too quiet for dinner time, and Rachel sat alone at the table, staring at a half-eaten plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Across from her, Dan scrolled through his phone, his plate untouched. He didn't even look up when he said it. "You ever think maybe you'd feel better if you didn't eat like a damn bulldozer every night?" The words hit her harder than the silence. Rachel blinked, holding her fork in midair. Her chest tightened, but not from the food, not from her weight. It was something deeper, a wound that had been sliced open again and again every day with words like that. "I'm not hungry anymore," she whispered, setting her fork down. Dan laughed. That'd be a first. Rachel pushed her chair back slowly, trying not to let him see her eyes welling up. But she knew he saw. He always saw. And somehow that made it worse. The man she married, the man she once thought was kind, now treated her body like a curse, like her weight was a punchline. She wasn't just overweight, she was 305 pounds, and Dan made sure she never forgot it. "Don't forget to wash my uniforms," he added as she left the room. "I've got that board meeting tomorrow. You know, the one where people actually care about success and appearance." Rachel didn't say a word. Her feet moved on autopilot, upstairs to the bathroom, where she locked the door and finally let the tears fall. She looked in the mirror. Really looked. Her body wasn't the enemy. It was the years of neglect, not just from Dan, but from herself. It hadn't always been this way. Back when they first moved into their little house in Oklahoma City, Dan used to touch her face gently, laugh at her silly jokes, dance with her in the kitchen barefoot. He used to say she was his forever. But somewhere along the line, he traded love for contempt. He stopped talking to her and started talking at her. The jokes stopped being funny. The kisses stopped coming. And the only thing he seemed to notice anymore was her size. He made it clear, in small jabs and loud silences, that she wasn't worth anything. Not in his eyes, not in society's, not in her own. Rachel sat on the edge of the tub and felt the familiar shame crawl up her skin. Not just because she was overweight, but because she had allowed this to become her life. Because she had stopped fighting for her own values, her health, her voice. Somewhere along the way, she traded in her dreams of prosperity and self-worth for silence and survival. Downstairs, Dan turned the TV on, loud, and cracked open a beer. Rachel could hear the sound of it fizzing, followed by another laugh from him. Probably at something she would never be part of. But something was different this time. This time the pain didn't make her shrink. This time it made her burn, not with anger, not yet, but with a quiet clarity that began to settle in her bones. She didn't want revenge, not yet. She wanted freedom. Real freedom. The kind that comes from taking your life back, pound by pound, breath by breath. She stood up slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She was still 305 pounds, still broken, still unseen. But in that moment, something changed inside her. And Dan, somewhere downstairs, didn't even feel the earthquake starting to rumble. The next morning, the Oklahoma sky was still gray when Rachel laced up her old sneakers. The kind that hadn't seen daylight in months. She stood by the front door for a moment, listening to Dan snoring upstairs, the sound of his sleep like a heavy reminder of everything she'd been stuck in. She opened the door slowly. The fall air hit her skin like a quiet wake-up call. Crisp, honest, a little painful. She stepped outside. At 305 pounds, walking wasn't easy. Not on her knees, not on her pride. But it wasn't about easy anymore. It was about beginning. Each step on the sidewalk felt like defiance. Not against Dan. Not yet. Against every lie she had told herself. Every, "you can't," every, "you're too far gone." She walked 3 blocks before her body begged her to stop. Her legs burned. Her breath came hard. But she didn't sit down. She just slowed her pace and kept moving. 1 block back home. That was it. But it was something. When she walked through the front door, Dan was in the kitchen, shirtless, eating cold pizza straight from the box. He gave her a long look and said, "What's this, some kind of health kick?" Rachel didn't answer. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, from change. "Just don't go wasting money on some dumb gym," he added, picking crust from his teeth. "You know we ain't got prosperity growing on trees." Rachel looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt focused. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Dan," she said quietly. He blinked, like the sentence hadn't registered. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't ask for your opinion," she repeated. "You worry about your values. I'll worry about my health." He scoffed, grabbing his keys off the counter. "Whatever, I'm late." The door slammed behind him. Rachel stood in the silence, her heart racing. Not from the walk, from the words. She had no plan, no diet, no coach. But she had one thing now, direction. And maybe that was more powerful than motivation. That night she sat at the kitchen table with a small plate of grilled chicken and steamed broccoli. She chewed slow, not because she wanted to, but because she was learning to listen to her body. Dan walked in around 8:30. He looked at her plate, then at his fast food bag. "Let me guess. Now you're one of those salad women," he sneered. "No," she replied calmly. "I'm just done eating pain." He didn't respond, just headed to the living room and turned on the game. That weekend, she walked again, then again on Sunday. By the following Friday, she was doing a mile a day. It hurt, she sweated, she cried sometimes when she got home. But it was honest pain, real pain, not the kind Dan handed her daily, not the kind that rotted your spirit from the inside out. At night, she'd open a notebook and start tracking everything. What she ate, how far she walked, how she felt. She wrote words like freedom, health, values, wealth. She wrote them even when they felt out of reach. By mid-November, Rachel was down 10 pounds. Not a miracle, not a transformation, but proof. Proof that she still had power. That she could build a life with her own hands, one rooted in self-respect and not shame. She didn't tell Dan, not because she feared his reaction, because she didn't need it. That alone was a kind of wealth she'd never known before. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, the weather in Oklahoma had turned sharp and dry. The trees along Rachel's street stood half naked, rustling with a kind of quiet honesty. Each morning, she walked a little farther. Each night, she logged her steps in the same notebook with shaky, determined hands. On November 24th, she stepped on the scale and saw the number, 275 pounds. She stared at it for a long while, like the number itself was trying to speak. She was still heavy, still far from her goal. But the drop from 305 pounds was more than weight. It was proof of something stronger than any insult Dan could throw at her. It was proof of ownership. Ownership of her health, her choices, her damn life. That night, the house filled with the smell of turkey and sweet potatoes. Dan's family came over, loud, sharp-tongued folks who never once asked how Rachel was doing. Dan's sister, Kim, was the worst. "Well, look at you," Kim said, smirking as she sipped her wine. "You trying some new diet again? You know those never last, right?" Rachel smiled gently, her voice steady. Actually, I've dropped 30 pounds. Kim raised a brow. Really? Huh. Didn't think you had the discipline. Dan snorted from across the room. She's just walking and eating rabbit food. Ain't like it's rocket science. There it was again. That sharp, slicing tone. The kind that made Rachel's cheeks go warm. But this time, something else bubbled underneath the shame. Clarity. Dan didn't hate her because she was overweight. He hated that she was doing something without him. That she wasn't begging for his praise or approval anymore. His control was slipping, and he felt it. After dinner, Rachel stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing the dishes while everyone else laughed in the living room. Dan walked in behind her. "You know," he said low, "you don't get some prize for starving yourself. You're still not worth much in this shape." She turned to face him. For the first time, she wasn't shaking. "You're right," she said quietly. "There's no prize, just peace. That's enough for me." Dan blinked, like he didn't know who he was talking to. Rachel walked upstairs and sat in front of her bedroom mirror. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel lonely. But tonight it felt full of something else. Power. She touched her face. Her cheekbones were beginning to show again. Her eyes looked clearer. There were still rolls and stretch marks and soft spots. But they were hers. And they didn't make her weak. They made her real. She thought about money, not the kind Dan chased, but the kind you invest in yourself. She thought about prosperity, not just in your wallet, but in your soul. The richness of showing up for yourself, day after day, even when no one claps. Especially when no one claps. Rachel wasn't skinny. She wasn't even halfway done. But she was honest. She was consistent. And for the first time in years, she was building something for herself. Something with real values, not just empty victories. By December 1st, she was meal prepping, drinking water, logging every bite, moving her body with purpose. She swapped late-night snacks for early morning walks. She traded emotional eating for journaling. She didn't talk to Dan much anymore. And he noticed. "You act like you're better than everybody now," he muttered one night, tossing his work shirt on the floor. "Just 'cause you dropped a few pounds?" Rachel didn't look at him. She was brushing her hair in the mirror. "I don't think I'm better," she said calmly. "I just think I deserve better." Dan laughed, but there was a tremble in it. And Rachel? She just kept brushing. Slow, gentle, like she was preparing for something. Not vanity, not revenge, victory, the kind that doesn't come with applause, the kind that grows in silence. By the second week of December, Oklahoma had turned bitter cold. The wind sliced through the air like it carried warnings, and the early mornings were dark and sharp. But Rachel kept walking. Every day. Rain, wind, even sleet, she was out there. Her old sneakers were wearing thin, the soles barely holding on, but she refused to quit. She'd lost 40 pounds. 265 pounds. That's where she stood now. She still had a long way to go, but the mirror told a different story every week. Her face was leaner, her eyes brighter, her clothes looser. She no longer wore baggy sweaters to hide. She wore them because she liked how they felt, like softness she had earned. One morning, after her walk, she stopped at the corner diner for a coffee. It was a small place with red vinyl booths and the smell of fried bacon stuck in the air. She used to avoid places like that, not because of the food, but because of the looks. But now she walked in like she belonged there. And she did. "Rachel, is that you?" The waitress, Gloria, leaned over the counter. "Girl, you're looking good. What's your secret?" Rachel smiled as she took the coffee. "No secret. Just walking and learning to eat like I respect myself. Gloria grinned. Well, keep going. You're glowing. That word stuck with her all day. Glowing. Not shrinking, not starving. Glowing. She went home that afternoon and stood in front of her closet. Most of her clothes didn't fit anymore. Even her winter coat looked like it belonged to someone else. She bundled it up and placed it in a donation bag. She didn't plan to grow back into it. Later that evening, she sat in bed with her notebook. She wrote one sentence across the page. My worth has nothing to do with how anyone else sees me. My worth is my values, my health, and my strength. Downstairs, Dan was on the couch, drinking again. He didn't say much these days. Not because he'd changed, but because he didn't know how to reach her anymore. She was no longer orbiting his moods. She was her own center now. One night, Rachel came downstairs to find Dan pacing in the kitchen. His jaw was tight, and he looked irritated. You got a letter? He said, tossing the envelope onto the table. From HR at my company. Why the hell would they be writing to you? Rachel opened it slowly. She already knew what it was. She had applied for a front desk admin role a few weeks earlier, just part-time. She wanted to start earning her own money again. A small job, but one with purpose. She didn't tell Dan because she didn't owe him that. Her eyes scanned the letter. She smiled. Interview scheduled for December 12th at 10 a.m. You're not serious, Dan said. That job's at my building. I know, Rachel replied, folding the paper neatly. You're gonna embarrass me. You're gonna make me look weak. Rachel looked him dead in the eye. You made yourself look weak when you mocked me for years. I'm just showing up now, for myself. Dan didn't have a comeback. Because for the first time, Rachel wasn't playing the game he built. She wasn't arguing, begging, defending. She was just moving forward, with grace, with quiet strength, and with a fire he couldn't touch. That night, she slept better than she had in years. The next morning, she walked 2 miles. The wind was brutal, but she didn't flinch. With every step, she whispered words into the cold air. Money doesn't define me. Prosperity isn't just cash. Real wealth is peace, health, freedom. She wasn't just changing her body. She was rebuilding her life, one frozen morning at a time. On the morning of December 12th, the sun finally broke through the cold Oklahoma sky. It was the kind of winter day that didn't feel so bitter, like maybe the air was rooting for you. Rachel stood in front of the bathroom mirror, wearing a navy blue blouse and black slacks that actually fit. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her makeup was light, just enough to remind herself she mattered. She weighed 251 pounds. Not a finish line, but far from where she began. She was down 54 pounds since that night Dan mocked her at the dinner table. Downstairs, Dan sat with a cup of coffee, pretending not to notice how put together she looked. You gonna be late, he said without looking up. Rachel checked her watch. I've got time. He shook his head. You really think some little desk job's gonna change anything? She stared at him for a second, then answered, calm and steady. No, but showing up for myself does. That's what changes everything. She grabbed her bag and walked out the door without another word. The HR building sat on the east side of Oklahoma City, one of those tall glass buildings that always felt too clean, too expensive. Rachel stood outside the main entrance, took a breath, and whispered to herself, "You belong here." Inside, the waiting room smelled like strong coffee and nervous energy. A receptionist handed her a clipboard and smiled. Rachel filled out the paperwork. Steady hands, deep breaths. When they called her name, she stood tall. The interview lasted 20 minutes. The questions were simple. What's your experience with scheduling? Can you handle high phone volume? How do you deal with difficult people? Rachel smiled when they asked that last one. I've lived with one for 10 years. I've got a PhD in difficult people. The hiring manager laughed. I like your honesty. As she walked out of the building, the winter sun warmed her face, and for a moment, Rachel forgot all the years she'd spent feeling invisible. Later that evening, Dan was already 2 beers in when she came through the door. Well? He asked. They offered me the job. He blinked. What? I start January 3rd, front desk. Benefits after 90 days. It's not a fortune, but it's steady money. I'll be contributing again. Dan laughed, bitter and sharp. You think a part-time gig makes you something special now? No, she said, but it makes me free. The next morning, Rachel dropped off her donation bags at a local shelter. Clothes she'd outgrown, emotionally and physically. She didn't need to hold on to what she'd already released. She stopped at a small boutique on Main Street and bought herself a new winter coat. It wasn't fancy, but it fit, not just her body, but the woman she was becoming. Outside, as she zipped the coat and crossed the parking lot, she caught her reflection in a storefront window. Not skinny, not perfect, but standing taller than she had in years. Rachel had learned that wealth wasn't in a paycheck. Prosperity wasn't in luxury. It was in choosing yourself. Again and again, especially when it's hard, especially when no one claps. Back at home, Dan barely acknowledged her. But Rachel wasn't looking for applause. She was looking for peace, health, stability. And for the first time, she was building a life that actually matched her values. A life where her worth wasn't measured by a man's approval, but by her own courage. And it was only just beginning. The first Monday of January arrived cold and clear. It was January 3rd, exactly 10 minutes past 7 in the morning, and Rachel stood in the break room of her new job with a paper cup of coffee in hand. The office buzzed with the low hum of keyboards and polite greetings. She was dressed in a soft gray sweater and navy slacks. Comfortable, clean, professional, and most importantly, confident. She had dropped another 10 pounds since her interview. She now weighed 241 pounds. Her face was leaner, her skin clearer. Her posture had changed too. It wasn't just weight she was losing. It was fear, bitterness, and everything else that had anchored her to a life she no longer wanted. Rachel spent her first week at the front desk smiling at strangers, organizing paperwork, answering phones, simple tasks. But they gave her rhythm, purpose, a paycheck. She even set up direct deposit. That first Friday, when the money hit her account, she stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't a lot, but it was hers. Her money, earned with dignity, and with every dollar came something more valuable: independence. That night she brought home groceries, fresh produce, chicken breasts, whole grain pasta. Dan raised an eyebrow when she unpacked the bags. What's all this? You act like we're rich now. Rachel set the tomatoes on the counter and spoke calmly. I'm not acting. I'm planning. He scoffed. Planning what? Your little health hobby? You'll quit like you always do. She looked at him. Really looked. This was a man who had mocked her, belittled her, laughed at her dreams. He wasn't just insecure. He was terrified, because she wasn't just changing, she was leaving him behind. Rachel didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just placed the final bag on the table and walked upstairs without a word. Over the next few weeks, their house became divided. Dan lived downstairs, watching TV, drinking, sleeping on the recliner most nights. Rachel lived upstairs, reading, stretching, journaling, and preparing her meals in silence. They barely spoke, and when they did, it was stiff, tense. He didn't like this new version of her, this version that didn't beg for attention or approval. She used to tiptoe. Now she moved through the house like she owned her air again. On January 21st, she stepped on the scale again. 234 pounds, 71 pounds gone. The woman in the mirror was no longer a victim. She had values now that guided every decision: peace, health, clarity. Her prosperity wasn't in possessions. It was in control. Control over her time, her body, her future. She treated herself to a new pair of jeans that actually hugged her curves. Not to show off, to feel herself again. She wore them to work, and even her manager complimented her. "You've got a glow about you lately, Rachel. Keep doing whatever you're doing." Dan noticed too. "You trying to impress someone at work?" he said one night, watching her walk across the living room. His tone was sour, jealous. "No," she replied without turning. "I'm trying to impress myself." He didn't answer, just grabbed another beer. The more Rachel rose, the more he seemed to sink. But she wasn't responsible for his downfall. She wasn't his mother. She wasn't his rehab. She wasn't his excuse. She was done shrinking for a man who had no intention of growing. And in that silence between them, something cracked wide open. The life they built was crumbling, but she wasn't scared. She was building something better. Brick by brick, pound by pound, breath by breath. By the first week of February, the winds in Oklahoma had calmed, but inside Rachel's home, the tension was heavier than ever. She now weighed 227 pounds. 78 pounds lost. She wasn't chasing a number. She was chasing herself. The version of Rachel who believed in her own worth, her health, her values. The version who didn't trade her dignity for comfort or stay quiet for the sake of keeping peace. Dan hadn't changed. He was still drinking, still bitter, still throwing petty comments her way. But they no longer landed. They fell flat, like words aimed at a wall that didn't care to echo them back. Then, on February 6th, something unexpected happened. Rachel got called into a closed-door meeting at work. Her manager, Carla, was waiting with a folder in hand. "Rachel," she said softly, "this is sensitive. And I'm only telling you because HR had to notify you for legal reasons." Rachel's heart pounded. "What is it?" Carla slid the folder across the desk. "There's been a formal complaint filed against your husband. Inappropriate behavior, abuse of power, multiple staff members. HR's investigating and asked if you'd be willing to sign the internal report as his spouse and employee." Rachel froze. The paper in front of her was a termination recommendation. Dan had been using company funds for personal expenses, harassing interns, showing up late, leaving early. He thought no one noticed. But someone did. And now it was official. Rachel looked down at the line requiring her signature. She didn't hesitate. She signed it at 10:45 a.m. on February 6th, 2023. And in that moment, she realized something. This wasn't just about Dan losing his job. This was about her gaining her life. That night, she came home early. Dan was on the porch, smoking, like nothing was wrong. "You're home early," he muttered. She nodded. "Yeah, got something for you." She handed him a copy of the HR notice. He looked at it, his face going pale. "What the hell is this?" "Your termination notice," Rachel said calmly. "Effective February 10th. "You knew about this?" he barked. "You let them do this to me?" "No," she said, her voice calm like a quiet fire. "You did this to you." He cursed under his breath, shaking his head. "This is all your fault. You think you're better than me now? Just because you lost some weight and got a paycheck?" "No, Dan," she replied. "Not just because of that." She took a step closer. It's because I rebuilt myself from the ground up while you wasted your life blaming everybody else. I worked for this. My health, my peace, my money, my prosperity. You threw your values out a long time ago. Now you're just mad that I picked mine back up." Dan stood frozen, unable to form a response. Rachel turned and walked inside. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She exhaled. Deep and slow. Later that evening, she lit a candle in her bedroom, took out her notebook, and wrote 3 words in bold letters across a blank page. Freedom. Stability. Wealth. Not the kind you stack in banks, the kind you carry in your bones. Rachel had been waiting for a long time, for love, for approval, for someone to rescue her. But now she knew the truth. No one was coming. And that was okay, because she had already rescued herself. By late February, Oklahoma began teasing spring. The mornings were still cold, but the sunlight lingered longer, and the air carried that early promise of something better. Rachel stood in front of her mirror, wearing a soft green blouse and black dress pants. Her hair curled gently over her shoulders. Her posture was tall, proud, present. She now weighed 225 pounds, an 80-pound journey. But this was never just about pounds. It was about freedom, about claiming her own prosperity, about rewriting every lie she'd ever believed about her worth, her value, her place in the world. At 10 a.m. sharp, Rachel walked into her workplace with a stack of folders in her arms. She passed the same front desk she once dreamed of sitting behind. Now, she had her own cubicle, her name on a plaque, her own space, her own money. Dan's name came up in conversation sometimes, usually in whispers. "He really messed up," they'd say. "Shame he thought he was untouchable." Rachel never added to the gossip. She just smiled politely and kept walking. Then, on the first Friday of March, something happened that brought everything full circle. A new HR assistant stopped by her desk. "Rachel," she said, "this might sound odd, but someone asked for you at the front desk, said they're dropping off paperwork, didn't leave a name." Rachel stood slowly. "I'll handle it." She walked down the hall, heels clicking, head high. And there he was. Dan, wearing an old hoodie and jeans that didn't fit like they used to. He looked smaller, like the weight of failure had finally settled into his shoulders. "Hey," he said quietly. Rachel said nothing. She waited. I'm dropping off the last of my company equipment. My badge, the laptop. They told me I had to leave it with HR, but I asked if I could see you." She crossed her arms. "Why?" Dan looked down. "I don't know. Maybe to say I was wrong. About a lot." There was a pause. "About what exactly?" she asked, voice calm but firm. He swallowed hard. "About you. I thought I had all the power. I thought you'd always stay, no matter what. I thought the money I made me more important." Rachel nodded slowly. "But I see it now," he continued. "You were the one with real strength. I didn't value that. I didn't value you." The hallway was quiet. And for a long moment, Rachel just stood there, looking at the man who once made her feel like she was nothing. "You know," she finally said, "I waited years for you to say something like that. I used to beg for it, silently. But now that it's here, I don't need it." He looked crushed. "I'm not angry," she added. "I'm not bitter. I'm just past it." Dan nodded, eyes glassy. "I hope you're happy." "I am," she said, "because I learned that real wealth isn't about who makes more money. It's about knowing who you are when nobody's clapping. It's about health, peace, values. That's the kind of prosperity I live by now." She turned to walk away, then stopped. "Oh, and Dan?" she said over her shoulder. "Yeah?" Next time you look in the mirror, ask yourself what you're building and who it's for." With that, she walked away, and she never looked back. That night, Rachel curled up in her living room, wrapped in a soft blanket with a journal in her lap and a candle flickering nearby. Her home was quiet, still, not lonely, free. She opened her notebook and wrote one last page. "I did not change to be loved. I changed to love myself, and now everything I choose comes from that love." She closed the journal, smiled to herself, and exhaled. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of return. A woman returning to her voice, her body, her power, her peace. A woman who refused to be forgotten in her own life. And now? She wasn't just living, she was thriving.